Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Within that immense span of time, life has emerged, evolved, and vanished again and again. Humans appeared very late in this story. Scientists estimate that our ancestors first began walking upright around 5 to 6 million years ago. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have existed for only about 300,000 years. For most of that time, life changed very little. Our ancestors hunted and gathered, lived nomadic lives, and depended entirely on nature. Their tools were simple. Fire was the greatest breakthrough. Beyond that, there were no major technological advances. Hundreds of thousands of years passed in near total repetition. This fits well with the rules of biological evolution, which unfold slowly, accumulating changes over countless generations. Yet it is precisely this long period of stability that raises a troubling question. If evolution is always so slow, what caused human history to suddenly turn in a completely different direction? Around 20,000 years ago, the picture began to change, and it did not change gradually. It changed rapidly. Humans began constructing massive stone structures like Göbekli Tepe at a time when they were supposedly still hunter-gatherers. There is no clear evidence of advanced agriculture preceding these sites. There is no sign of complex societies as we define them today, and yet the architecture is precise, organized, and clearly ritualistic. Soon after came agriculture, cities, legal systems, writing, mathematics, and astronomy. In just a few thousand years, humanity moved from a primitive lifestyle to fully developed civilizations. Then, within the following 12,000 years, we created machines, advanced technologies, powerful weapons, and eventually launched spacecraft into outer space. This pace is unlike anything seen in earlier stages of evolution. It is too fast, too concentrated, and too abnormal when compared to the hundreds of thousands of years of stagnation that came before. Modern science has proposed several explanations for this leap. Some argue that climate change forced innovation. Others point to survival pressures and population growth. Yet these explanations have not satisfied everyone. They fail to fully explain why this explosion of progress happened so suddenly. Long before modern science, ancient peoples also tried to answer this question in their own way. In the myths and religions of many cultures, human advancement is not portrayed as accidental. It is tied to the arrival of gods or beings from the sky, entities with physical forms, advanced tools, and superior knowledge, who directly taught humans how to build, farm, and organize societies. These stories appear across the world, independent of one another, yet they follow strikingly similar patterns. That raises a difficult question. Are these merely religious symbols, or are they distant memories of an intervention that once took place? And if so, who or what was responsible for the unnatural leap in human history? In most ancient civilizations, gods were not described as abstract ideas or invisible spirits. They were portrayed as tangible beings with defined forms, physical bodies, voices, and deliberate actions. These gods were said to descend from the sky, appear among humans, live alongside them for a period of time, and then depart. They ate, felt anger, showed affection, and imposed punishment. More importantly, they carried knowledge of agriculture, construction, astronomy, law, and social organization. In many accounts, it is the arrival of these gods that marks the beginning of civilization, rather than a long, gradual process of natural evolution. These descriptions are not confined to a single culture. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were known as those who came down from the heavens, and were said to have directly taught humanity writing and law. In the Bible, angels and the sons of God descend to earth, take human wives, and produce extraordinary generations. In India, the gods of the Vedas travel in flying chariots and impart advanced astronomical knowledge. Greek mythology describes the Olympian gods as repeatedly intervening in human affairs. Ancient Chinese traditions also speak of celestial beings who descended to Earth, bringing with them divine texts and secret knowledge. The striking repetition of the same motif across civilizations separated by vast distances and eras raises a question that is difficult to ignore. Is this all merely the product of human imagination, or are these extremely ancient memories distorted and mythologized over time? If these stories reflect a real historical event, then they may not be describing gods in a purely spiritual sense, but real entities that once appeared in human history. And if that is the case, our story may have begun in a way very different from what we have been led to believe. Around 4500 BCE, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a civilization emerged at a speed that continues to astonish historians. This was Sumer. Unlike prehistoric communities that evolved slowly over countless generations, Sumer appears to enter history already complete, already formed, with all the foundational elements of a civilized society in place. Large cities were carefully planned. Populations were dense, social structures were organized and hierarchical. There is little evidence of a long experimental phase preceding this rise. Sumer did not gradually grow out of small villages. It appeared as if it had been built from a blueprint. This has led many researchers to ask a fundamental question: where did such a fully developed civilization acquire this foundational knowledge? And how long did it truly take? Sumer's achievements emerged almost simultaneously. Cuneiform writing was developed to record economics, law, astronomy, and ritual practices. This was a complex writing system requiring abstract thinking and advanced linguistic organization. Alongside writing came law. The Code of Ur-Nammu, considered one of the earliest written legal systems, clearly defined rights, duties, and punishments within society. The Sumerians also mastered mathematics, astronomy, and calendrical systems, laying the groundwork for how humanity still measures time today. They advanced agriculture, engineered irrigation systems to control flooding, and transformed a harsh landscape into a productive center. They established state governance, kingship, and a powerful priestly class. All of this appeared with almost no trace of a long, gradual learning process. In the mid-19th century, archaeological excavations in modern-day Iraq produced discoveries that reshaped our understanding of Sumer. Between 1843 and 1849, thousands of clay tablets were uncovered in ancient cities and royal palaces. At first, many believed these were nothing more than simple administrative records, but once deciphered, their contents revealed something far more profound. The tablets did not only record taxes, food supplies, or trade, they spoke of gods, of the origins of the world, of beings known as the Anunnaki, gods who came from the sky, taught humanity knowledge, and ruled in a distant age long before recorded history. From this point forward, Sumer was no longer seen only as the cradle of civilization, but as a key to a far larger question. Could human history have begun much earlier and in a far more complex way than we have ever been taught to believe? In the Sumerian clay tablets, the Anunnaki are not described as abstract gods or purely spiritual symbols. The name Anunnaki is commonly interpreted as the offspring of Anu, or those who came down from the sky. Anu was regarded as the supreme deity, representing the heavens and ultimate authority. The Anunnaki were his descendants, beings assigned to govern Earth in a distant ancient age. What stands out most is how the Sumerians described them. The Anunnaki had definite physical forms. They resembled humans but were taller, stronger, and more imposing. They had families, hierarchies, and clearly defined relationships between fathers and sons, brothers and rivals. They argued, clashed, and made decisions that were political in nature. These accounts are fundamentally different from the idea of metaphysical or symbolic gods. They read more like records of powerful, flesh and blood individuals. The Anunnaki were not merely worshipped. They were remembered as beings who lived, acted, and eventually departed. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki did not originate on Earth. Their home was a planet called Nibiru, located at the far edge of the solar system. This planet is described as having an extremely elongated orbit, taking approximately 3,600 years to complete a single revolution around the sun. During periods when Nibiru approached Earth, its presence was said to cause major gravitational and environmental disturbances. But more critical than its orbit was the condition of Nibiru itself. The text suggests that the planet was facing atmospheric degradation and a severe survival crisis. The climate was destabilizing, resources were diminishing, life on Nibiru was under threat. For the Anunnaki, leaving their homeworld was not a choice, it was a matter of survival. Their solution centered on an element both familiar and deeply paradoxical: gold. From a modern perspective, gold is not merely a precious metal, but one with unique properties and advanced technology. It conducts electricity efficiently, resists corrosion, and reflects radiation. Ancient texts claim the Anunnaki required gold to restore and protect Nibiru's atmosphere, yet gold was scarce on their own planet. Earth, by contrast, possessed vast reserves. This need drove the Anunnaki to cross space, arrive on Earth, and begin large-scale extraction. Seen from this angle, the arrival of the Anunnaki carries little resemblance to a purely religious event. It resembles a technological expedition driven by an existential crisis, and from that moment on, Earth's history became inseparably linked to those who came from the sky. In the ancient texts of Sumer, gold is not presented as a symbol of wealth or ornamentation. It appears instead as a vital material, directly tied to the survival of the gods themselves. From a modern perspective, gold possesses properties that science has only fully understood in recent times. It is an excellent conductor of electricity. It does not oxidize. It reflects radiation efficiently and is used to shield equipment from the harsh conditions of space. Gold also plays a critical role in air filtration, chemical processing, and biomedical technology. These are values that ancient humans could not have discovered on their own. To them, gold was simply a beautiful, shiny metal, nothing more. And yet, this creates a paradox. If gold held no practical value for early humans, why were they driven to extract it from the earth on such a massive scale, and for such an extended period of time? According to Sumerian inscriptions, this demand did not originate with humanity. It came from the Anunnaki. Around 445,000 years ago, these beings are said to have arrived on Earth as part of a mission with a very specific purpose. At that time, Earth was an ideal planet, rich in resources, especially gold, but it lacked any advanced civilization. There were only wild animals and primitive hominids. For the Anunnaki, these conditions were perfect for establishing a mining colony. They did not come to settle the planet as humans would later do. They came to extract resources. Gold was mined from deep underground and then transported elsewhere. In these accounts, Earth is not the center of the story. It is a waypoint within a much larger operation. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki are said to have built the city of Eridu, often regarded as the first city on Earth. This was not merely a place of habitation, but a command center. Alongside Eridu, the texts describe a special garden, abundant with life and vegetation, known as Eden. Eden is not portrayed as an abstract heavenly paradise. It is described as a controlled zone, a restricted area where the Anunnaki lived and worked, separated from the untamed world beyond. From Eridu and Eden, gold extraction operations were organized and supervised. Viewed through this lens, these ancient stories no longer read as simple mythology. They resemble early records of a planet-scale resource extraction project. And gold, not divine power, emerges as the true motive behind the Anunnaki's presence on Earth. Before humanity was created, Sumerian texts state that the Anunnaki did not carry out the work of gold mining themselves. Instead, they relied on a subordinate race known as the Igigi. The Igigi are described as beings lower in status than the Anunnaki, yet capable of enduring heavy labor. They were sent deep into underground mines, where they worked continuously under brutal conditions. Their task was to extract gold, transport it, and process the ore to meet the needs of the Anunnaki. In ancient accounts, the EGG are not praised or worshipped. They appear as an exploited labor class. They held no power, no voice, and no choice. To the Anunnaki, the EGG were simply tools, means to ensure the survival of the planet Nibiru. But this prolonged exploitation planted the seeds of a major turning point. After many years of forced labor, the EGG began to resist. The clay tablets describe an unprecedented rebellion. The EGG refused to work. They destroyed their tools. They surrounded the dwellings of the Anunnaki and demanded an end to their oppression. This is considered the first war ever fought on Earth, not between humans, but between beings who came from the sky. The conflict reveals something crucial. The Anunnaki were not all-powerful gods beyond challenge. They had limits, and they could be opposed. Ultimately, with superior technology and weaponry, the Anunnaki crushed the rebellion. The Igigi were defeated. Many were destroyed. Those who survived were severely punished. The war ended, but its consequences were profound. In the aftermath of the Igigi uprising, the Anunnaki faced an existential problem. They still needed gold. Mining operations had to continue, but their former workforce could no longer be trusted. The Igigi were no longer an option. The Anunnaki found themselves at a dead end. It was under these circumstances that a new solution began to take shape, one that was bolder, more dangerous, and decisive for the future of Earth. Rather than seeking another species to enslave, the Anunnaki began to consider creating a workforce of their own, a species intelligent enough to perform the labor, strong enough to endure the conditions, yet weak enough to never rebel as the Igigi had. From this point forward, the story is no longer centered on gods and their servants. It shifts into a new chapter, one in which humanity enters history for the first time, not as the masters of Earth, but as a creation designed to solve the crisis of those who came from the sky. Part 7. After the failure of the Igigi, the Anunnaki were left with no remaining options. Gold extraction could not stop. Nibiru was still dying, yet they could no longer rely on a workforce capable of rebellion. According to Sumerian texts, the solution that emerged was unprecedented. Rather than searching for another species, the Anunnaki would create a new labor force themselves. Their attention turned to the primitive hominids already inhabiting Earth, particularly Homo erectus. These beings walked upright, used rudimentary tools, and demonstrated the capacity to learn. The Anunnaki decided to combine their own genetic material with this species, producing a hybrid race. The objective was clear. The new beings had to be intelligent enough to understand commands, strong enough to perform grueling labor, yet submissive enough to avoid repeating the Igigi's rebellion. Viewed this way, the origin of humanity was not the result of purely natural evolution, but a deliberate bioengineering project. The early experiments, however, did not succeed. Ancient clay tablets describe the emergence of malformed beings, gigantic figures with extraordinary strength but lacking intelligence and self-control. In later traditions, they would be known by many names, the most prominent being the Nephilim. These beings were too dangerous to use. They could not follow instructions. They produced chaos rather than order. Over time, memories of these failed experiments were mythologized. They evolved into stories of monsters, giants, and half-human, half-divine creatures found in the legends of many cultures. From this perspective, mythical monsters are not merely products of imagination. They may be distorted remnants of unsuccessful genetic trials, preserved through oral tradition across thousands of years. Eventually, the Anunnaki achieved what they had been seeking, a being created with the right balance between intelligence and obedience. This individual was called Adamu. According to ancient texts, Adamu was the first successful human created in the image of the gods. This phrase is not purely symbolic. It implies a physical and structural resemblance between humans and the Anunnaki. Adamu was not merely a laborer. He became the template for future generations. From Adamu, humanity was replicated and deployed into the mining operations. Notably, the name Adamu bears a clear resemblance to Adam in the biblical book of Genesis. This raises a troubling possibility that religious creation stories may originate from extremely ancient memories of a real event, a time when humans were not born free on Earth, but deliberately created to serve a purpose that was never truly their own. To awakening. In the earliest period after their creation, humans were not the masters of Earth. According to ancient texts, they were brought into existence for a very specific purpose: labor. They were sent deep into underground mines to extract gold for the Anunnaki. Their lives were confined to repetitive work. There was no choice, no creativity, no concept of freedom. Humans of this era are described as obedient beings, intelligent enough to understand instructions, but not yet conscious enough to question them. They did not build civilizations of their own. They did not record their own history. All of their energy was devoted to mining labor. In many ancient traditions, memories of this period survive as stories of bondage, of humans forced to serve the gods. These may be remnants of a time when humanity existed but had not yet become human in the modern sense. Over time, the relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity began to change. Some texts suggest that certain Anunnaki, particularly Enki, began to pass knowledge on to humans. They taught them how to cultivate crops and sustain themselves, how to build shelters from earth and stone, how to organize communities, communicate through language, and form culture. This was not merely technical instruction, it was the transfer of ways of thinking. Humans began to observe nature, recognize patterns, and preserve knowledge across generations. From this point forward, they were no longer just tools of labor. They began developing awareness of themselves and of their communities. This phase may have laid the foundation for humanity's later leaps in intelligence, but with knowledge came an unintended consequence. Humans began to exceed the role the Anunnaki had intended for them. One of the most critical limitations imposed on humanity was control over reproduction. According to ancient texts, humans were forbidden from multiplying too rapidly. But this restriction was not upheld. Human populations expanded quickly, beyond control. Settlements became crowded. Pressure on resources intensified. This was seen as a threat to the order the Anunnaki had established. As a result, many groups of humans were expelled from protected regions such as Eden and Eridu. They were forced into the wild, left to survive without the oversight or protection of the gods. This narrative bears striking similarities to the biblical story of the fall. Humanity is cast out of paradise after violating a command. Viewed through this lens, the fall is not merely a moral allegory. It may be an ancient memory of the moment humanity began to break free from the control of its creators and take its first uncertain steps toward independence. In the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are not portrayed as a single unified force. Deep divisions existed among them, most notably between two central figures, Enki and Enlil. Enki is often described as the god of wisdom, water, creation, and life. He was directly involved in the creation of humanity and maintained a close relationship with them. Enki did not view humans merely as tools of labor, but as beings with the potential to grow and evolve. He was the one who passed down knowledge, teaching humans how to cultivate the land, build structures, and organize their lives. In many accounts, Enki appears as a quiet protector, willing to defy commands in order to shield humanity from total destruction. He represents a nurturing force, one that guides rather than dominates. In contrast, Enlil is depicted as the god of air, storms, and supreme authority over Earth. He was responsible for maintaining order and enforcing discipline. To Enlil, humanity was first and foremost a workforce that needed to be controlled. Population growth, rising self-awareness, and humanity's tendency to exceed imposed limits led him to see humans as a potential threat. Enlil did not believe in education or gradual guidance. He believed in punishment. In the text, it is Enlil who repeatedly proposed harsh measures to force humanity back into its original state of obedience. The opposition between Enki and Enlil was not merely a personal rivalry. It reflected two fundamentally different visions of humanity and the future of Earth. To restrain humanity, the Anunnaki, under Enlil's influence, intervened through large-scale catastrophes. Plagues were unleashed to weaken the population. Droughts were imposed, causing crop failures and widespread famine. Swarms of destructive insects were released to devastate food supplies. These disasters were not random events. They are described as deliberate actions intended to restore order according to the will of the gods. In many later cultures, memories of these events survived as stories of divine wrath, but viewed through a different lens, they may represent traces of an internal conflict, one in which the fate of humanity was decided by disagreements among the very beings who created them. According to Sumerian texts, the greatest catastrophe in ancient history was not war or disease, but the return of Nibiru. As this planet approached Earth along its long orbital cycle, its immense gravitational force triggered severe disruptions. Polar ice melted rapidly, sea levels rose, vast volumes of water poured into low-lying regions, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions spread across the planet, the climate descended into chaos. Relentless rainfall continued without end. In ancient accounts, this marked the moment Earth entered a phase of forced purification. The earliest cities were submerged. The first centers of civilization vanished from the surface of the planet. For humanity, this was not merely a natural disaster. It was the end of an era. Amid this destruction, not all of humanity was abandoned. Ancient texts recount that some of the Anunnaki, particularly Enki, defied the collective decision. They chose to preserve a fragment of life. A man named Utnapishtim was warned in advance of the coming catastrophe. He was instructed on how to construct a special vessel. In some descriptions, it is a ship that floats upon the waters. In others, it resembles a craft capable of hovering above the surface. Utnapishtim took with him his family, seeds of cultivated plants, and various animal species. As the floodwaters swept across the earth, this vessel became a sanctuary for life itself. When the catastrophe passed, existence was allowed to begin again from what had been preserved. What is striking is that the memory of the Great Flood does not belong to Sumer alone. In the Bible, the story of Noah follows an almost identical structure. In India, Manu is warned by Vishnu of an impending deluge and saves life. In Greek mythology, Deucalion survives the wrath of Zeus. In Polynesian traditions, Nu is rescued aboard a great canoe. These stories emerge from cultures separated by thousands of miles, yet they share the same pattern: a global catastrophe, near total destruction, and a selective rescue. This repetition makes the Great Flood resemble more than a local legend. It reads like a collective human memory of a time when civilization was erased and forced to begin again from nothing. When the waters finally receded, Earth was no longer the same. Ancient cities had vanished. Centers of knowledge that once existed were buried beneath mud and seawater. The humans who survived emerged into an emptied world, where memories of the previous civilization survived only as fragmented stories. Most of the old knowledge was lost. Skills that had once been taught were no longer fully remembered. Humanity was forced to begin again, almost from nothing. This was a true reset of civilization. Humans returned to a simpler way of life, relearning how to farm, domesticate animals, and build communities. Traces of the former age lingered only as legends, passed down through generations and slowly transformed over time. This rupture is what gives human history its sense of discontinuity, as if a crucial chapter had been erased from collective memory. According to Sumerian texts, before leaving Earth, the Anunnaki carried out one final intervention. They no longer needed gold. The expedition had ended, but they did not depart without leaving their mark. Humanity was taught foundational knowledge to rebuild society. Mathematics was passed down to enable measurement and construction. Astronomy allowed humans to observe the skies and keep time. Writing was introduced to record events and preserve memory. Laws were established to maintain order. Alongside this came the emergence of kingship. Certain lineages were granted authority, believed to carry divine blood traced back to the Anunnaki. This gave rise to the earliest dynasties, where power was inherited through bloodlines and regarded as a gift from the gods. In many cultures, kings were described as descendants of deities, directly reflecting memories of this period. One of the most significant structures built after the Great Flood was the ziggurat. These massive, stepped towers rose above Sumerian cities. Ziggurats were not merely temples. They were precisely aligned with constellations and astronomical cycles, suggesting a function beyond ordinary religious ritual. Viewed one way, ziggurats served as markers, beacons pointed toward the sky. They were built to signal Earth's position within the cosmos, as if sending a message. If the Anunnaki truly came from the stars, then the ziggurats may represent humanity's expectation of their return. And from that moment on, human history entered a new phase, more independent than before, yet forever carrying the shadow of those who once created it. When examining the ancient art and reliefs of Sumer and the civilizations that followed, one symbol appears with striking frequency: the serpent. Snakes coiled around staffs, paired serpents in perfect symmetry, or two intertwined snakes forming the caduceus. In later cultures, the caduceus became a symbol of knowledge and healing, but in its earliest context, the serpent carried a deeper meaning. It was associated with rebirth, life force, and invisible currents moving within the human body. From a modern perspective, the image of a coiled serpent closely resembles the double helix structure of DNA. In Eastern traditions, the serpent also represents Kundalini, a latent energy said to lie along the spine, activated only when a person reaches a certain level of awakening. Seen this way, the serpent symbol no longer appears purely mythological. It resembles a form of encoded knowledge about biology and consciousness. Another symbol frequently depicted in the hands of the Anunnaki is the pine cone. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a natural object, yet its deliberate and repeated presence in ancient art suggests a specific meaning. The pine cone follows a spiral structure governed by the golden ratio, a mathematical principle found throughout nature, from seashells and sunflowers to entire galaxies. Within the human body, the pine cone bears a remarkable resemblance to the pineal gland. This small organ sits at the center of the brain and is linked to circadian rhythms, light perception, and states of consciousness. In many esoteric traditions, the pineal gland is regarded as the third eye, a gateway to higher awareness. The pinecone symbol, therefore, is often interpreted as a marker of awakened consciousness and knowledge beyond the physical realm. Alongside these symbols appears another recurring image, a small bag, often referred to as the handbag, found in the art of Sumer, Assyria, and even the Olmec civilization of Central America. Divine figures are consistently shown holding this object, as if carrying something of great importance. Some interpretations suggest it represents the water of life, a substance that enables creation and transformation. Others propose that it symbolizes seeds, not only of crops but of life itself. Viewed through a modern lens, the handbag may represent genetic technology, a container for biological material, or the essential knowledge required to create and sustain life. When considered together, these symbols no longer appear random. They resemble lingering traces, hints that the knowledge once passed to humanity was deliberately encoded, waiting for a time when humans would be capable of understanding it again. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki did not disappear forever. They left Earth according to the cycle of their home planet. Nibiru is described as having an extremely long orbit, taking approximately 3,600 years to complete a single revolution around the sun. Each time Nibiru approaches the inner solar system, it is said to influence Earth not only gravitationally, but also to coincide with periods of major upheaval in history. The arrival and departure of the Anunnaki are closely tied to these cycles. After the Great Flood, they are believed to have left Earth once their mind mining mission was complete. Yet the structures they left behind, ziggurats, astronomical systems, and foundational knowledge suggest something more deliberate. They did not leave quietly, they left markers, as if they intended humanity to remember specific times, locations, and the rhythm of their return. According to ancient calculations found in Sumerian texts, the next close passage of Nibiru is predicted to occur around the year 2900. While this date remains highly contested, it continues to stand as a point many find difficult to ignore. From a modern perspective, the question is no longer simply whether Nibiru exists. Contemporary science has detected anomalies in the orbits of celestial bodies at the outer edge of the solar system. Some astronomers propose the existence of a large, unseen planet, commonly referred to as Planet X or Planet 9. While there is no confirmed evidence that this object is Nibiru, the overlap between modern observations and ancient descriptions keeps the hypothesis alive. If the Anunnaki once came to Earth in response to a survival crisis, the question becomes whether that crisis was ever resolved, and if not, whether they might return to intervene once again. History shows that whenever humanity reaches a major turning point, stories of the gods' return tend to resurface with renewed intensity. Perhaps the more important question is not whether they will return, but how humanity has changed since they left. If the ancient accounts hold any truth, then the knowledge the Anunnaki imparted was not confined to texts or stone monuments. It may have been encoded far more deeply within our own biology. Many traditions speak of an untapped potential carried within humanity, a form of inherited memory, a capacity for understanding that lies beyond our current limits. The question is whether humanity is ready to activate that knowledge. If the Anunnaki truly existed and return in cycles, then their next arrival, if it happens, would not be merely an astronomical event. It would be the greatest test of human consciousness, ethics, and maturity. When the entire story is viewed as a whole, one unavoidable question emerges. Are humans the result of a purely natural evolutionary process spanning millions of years, or the product of deliberate intervention? Modern science offers compelling evidence for biological evolution, yet significant gaps remain. Sudden leaps in history, the abrupt appearance of civilization, knowledge far ahead of its time in ancient cultures, discontinuities that feel as though history itself was erased and rewritten. The stories of the Anunnaki do not necessarily deny evolution. They introduce the possibility that evolution was once accelerated, guided, or interfered with at a very distant point in the past. And if that did occur, then human history may be far more complex than what is recorded in textbooks. Another issue must also be considered. The history we know may no longer be complete. Civilizations swallowed by floods, libraries destroyed, clay tablets lost or vanished. With each catastrophe, with every rebuilding of society, humanity preserved only fragments of its own memory. The rest was mythologized, absorbed into religion, or dismissed as fantasy. If the Anunnaki truly existed and played a role in humanity's formation, then the clearest evidence may no longer exist. What remains are scattered pieces, symbols, legends that appear strangely similar across cultures separated by time and distance. And it is from these fragments that modern humanity has begun to re-examine the question of its own origins. If the Anunnaki were real, then the final question is not who they were, it is who we are in relation to them. Were we merely a completed experiment, a labor force left behind, or a species created with far greater potential than its original purpose? And if they were once regarded as gods, then what are they to us now? Creators? Teachers? Or simply a closed chapter in the vast history of the universe? The answer may remain beyond our reach, but the act of questioning, of doubting, of re-examining the past may be the clearest sign that humanity is no longer just a species created to obey, but one that is slowly becoming the true author of its own story.